Welcome to Petrol Lounge. I'm Jack, and Petrol Lounge is proud to present the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren. You have the Carrera GT, which is trading at somewhere around 1.5 million today. You have the Enzo trading at 3.5 million, and you have this car that really you can pick up for anywhere from $350,000 to $500,000. It's really a bit of a forgotten supercar, and I think a lot of it has to do with just the way that it looked and its kind of design philosophy. It was a contemporary. It cost roughly the same. The performance was roughly the same. We're talking Nürburgring times that were very similar. We're talking 0 to 60 times very similar, but the design philosophies were very different, and it ended up with this car just being the one that people forgot about. And I think as time goes on, this car is going to become more important as the things that made it less important when it was new start to fade from history and you get into what the car is today. Mercedes-Benz builds a luxury car, and that's kind of what this car is. It's not as crazy exotic as the Ferrari. It's not as engaging to drive and the real sports car that the Carrera GT is, but it's still really exotic, and it's exotic in a very strange way because this car wasn't actually built by Mercedes-Benz. It wasn't really designed by Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz went to McLaren to have this car built. Gordon Murray sort of was the idea behind it. There were some difficulties because Mercedes-Benz wanted a Mercedes-Benz. McLaren wanted a McLaren, and you ended up with something that's kind of a little bit of both and kind of neither. People don't see it as the exotic it is. So what do I mean by this car really is an exotic? Well, you start with the whole entire car is carbon fiber. Every body panel is carbon fiber. The subframes are carbon fiber. Everything in it is carbon fiber. And when we open the hood, you'll see just how dramatically different this car is. This engine that is crammed behind the front axle of the car, it is a mid-engine design. It's a front mid, but it's still an exotic mid-engine car. All this carbon fiber here, this is structural carbon fiber in the car. You have this mechanism here to actually open the hood that is really dramatic and really strange and odd. Doesn't look like anything else. Obviously, a lot of design work went into this. While we have the hood open, let's talk about the engine in this car. We're looking at a 5.4 liter V8 supercharged. This car made an impressive amount of horsepower for the time. It was a little over 600 horsepower, something like 700-ish Newton meters of force. It was a great car with a great engine, but unfortunately, just a few years later, Mercedes-Benz comes out with the SL65 AMG, which is an engine that had almost as much horsepower. We're talking maybe 15, 16 horsepower less, and a whole lot more torque, which is actually the thing that you notice when you're driving a car. You really notice how the car accelerates, and that's a function of torque. This car had a lot of torque, but not compared to that. And when you talk about a special, exotic, hyper car, and then your manufacturer comes out with something that actually is as fast or a little bit faster, depending on how you measure it, it takes away a little bit of the specialness of your hyper exotic. So I think that kind of depresses the value of this car a little bit for, its initial time period up until now. And then you've also got the problem of the transmission in this car. When you talk about the driver's car that is the Carrera GT, you're talking about a car that has a real manual transmission. It's one of the things that people really love about the Carrera GT. It is a driver's car. It expects you to be a driver. And if you look at the hyper exotic Enzo, it doesn't have an actual third pedal and a gated shifter, but it does have an F1 style transmission that has a real manual gearbox with a clutch. And you do notice that, and you do feel that, and it feels special. And then this has a 5-speed automatic transmission with a torque converter. It's a very good transmission. Mercedes-Benz makes wonderful transmissions. It drives really well, but it doesn't feel exotic. You have a car that McLaren built. They built it in their factory in England. They're used to building things like the McLaren F1, and they're partnered up with Mercedes building this car, and you end up with that design philosophy of, we really want it to be luxurious and easy to drive, and McLaren wants to build a car that is this hypercar monster. And you do get a little bit of that flavor of each, but never as much as if it was, purely McLaren or purely Mercedes. But if you were a Mercedes buyer and you wanted it to be a really luxurious highway cruiser, you do get that, but the car is loud and kind of rowdy, and it's not powerful in the way that a normal AMG Mercedes is. It wants to be wrung out hard and driven like a McLaren. So a McLaren owner looks at it and says, it's a little too Mercedes. A Mercedes owner goes, it's a little too McLaren. But over time, I think this car has started to come into its own and become exotic hypercar that has a wonderful look, a wonderful presence, and is just a delight to drive. It does a lot of things very well. So as we come to the back of the car, this is a very wide automobile. It's very distinctive. It really stands out. Again, we're getting to the Mercedes design philosophy. This, in Mercedes' mind, is a GT car, not a hyper exotic. The trunk space back here is amazing for even just a regular sports car, but for the exotic that this car is, it's obvious Mercedes saw this as a GT car as much as a track car, because you could put 4 sets of golf clubs back here. It's really crazy. It is quite roomy and spacious. And then there's some other oddities. As I go through the car, I'm always astounded at how much carbon fiber there is. I was just touching the interior door panels earlier, and I was like, oh wait, this whole door is carbon fiber. Everything here is carbon fiber. The whole car is carbon fiber. And then we come down here and you have this diffuser, and this is plastic. On all modern cars now, all modern hypercars, it's just really common for this to be absolutely carbon fiber, but we're talking 2005. We're not talking 2021. Today, you kind of use carbon fiber as a garnish. It's a little extra that makes the car feel racy and neat, and it looks cool, and everybody loves to see it. In '05, it was really seen more as a structural component. It was not really something that you showed off the way that you do today. So in some ways, it's not surprising that this is plastic, but looking at it with modern eyes, you see it and you say, well, why did you do that? Mercedes-Benz did something else that was very indicative of cars of this time period. They have this kind of twist style wheel, but they did something really different here. Normally on most manufacturers, when you have this kind of styling on the wheel, you end up with a different style on the other side, because what they do is they just use this wheel on the other side of the car. Mercedes actually made a separate wheel for every corner of this car, because the rear wheels are wider than the front. This wheel only belongs on this corner of the car. If you go to the other side, the twist is in the opposite direction. So if something were to happen to one of these wheels, you have to specify exactly which wheel on the car you need to replace. And there is no like, well, I'll take the wheels off and I'll put these on that side or whatever. Nope, this wheel goes here and only here. As we move inside the car, the exoticness continues. You have obviously the gull-wing doors. Those are a real presence here with the car. Also, these bucket seats in the car are very bespoke, very un-Mercedes. They're a carbon fiber seat. They're very, very thin, very light, and they actually came in different sizes. And another interesting point is they are one piece. So you don't have a whole lot of adjustability in the seat like you do in a normal Mercedes-Benz. You can, change the rake of the seat a little bit. You can move it back and forth. You can make it go up and down a little bit, but you're kind of in the seat with the seat the way it is. I'm currently sitting in the XXL seat. The passenger seat over here is the XL seat, and I can tell you, I'm not a big guy. This seat is really tight, even for me. I don't understand why this is the XXL, and I can't imagine how small like the medium or the small seats are, but I can tell you the difference between the XXL and the XL is that the XXL has an extra inch of headroom in this car, which I don't personally need, but the owner of this car really does. He's a very tall guy. He looked for this car with the XXL seats. And the interesting thing is you cannot get them in the passenger seat. It is a driver's seat only option. So the passenger seat in this car is different than the driver's seat. Looking around in here, we notice that the door sills are carpeted. It's just a really nice touch. It's got a little leather strip on it. It's very, very different than getting into the normal SL Mercedes-Benz. But as you look around, some of the things in here are also shared with the SL car. There's some parts binning going on. The dash vents here, they're very round. We're continuing the round language from the exterior of the car. The buttons on the steering wheel, they mimic the headlights. And these are the same buttons you're going to find in the SL class Mercedes-Benz. These are the same vents that you're going to find. The gear shift lever in this car is very bespoke to this car. It has similarities with the SL. It still has the start-stop button on the top of it, but it has this neat little flip-up cover that you don't find in any other Mercedes products, and it really makes it kind of feel like a fighter plane. It feels like a little safety switch that you flip up so you can actually access the start-stop button. And speaking of that, that was something that was still kind of new for this time period. We've gotten very used to, with all the keyless entry and keyless start, you find start buttons in everything from Toyota Priuses to BMWs to, hyper exotics. It doesn't matter. Everybody's got a start button these days. But in '05, this was still relatively new. I remember seeing it first in the S2000, and there's still some peculiarities about it because it was so new. So we're used to, you just get in the car today, you hit the start-stop button and the engine starts. That doesn't happen in this car. I can have my foot on the brake, I'm pushing the button, it's not even waking up. You actually have to get the key out. You have to put the key in the ignition, and then you have to turn the car on, just like a normal car, but you can't turn it another click to actually start the engine. You turn the key, take your hand off the key, flip the cover open, and now you can access the start-stop button. There are some things in this car that are special to this car. A lot of the central cluster is shared with the SL series of Mercedes-Benz. These top vents up here, they come right out of that car. This bottom climate control, which actually has some really cool luxury features to it. This is also found in the SL class, but this part of the center stack here is very bespoke to the SLR. These controls here control your suspension. You can set it in sport mode or race mode, and there's a real noticeable McLaren influence on that. You'll see similar dials to this in the McLarens of today, the MP412C, the 720S. You'll see these knobs. This is kind of where they start with. You have two knobs that controls all of your suspension and your calibration for how the car behaves on track. It also has a lever here that will control the rear wing. You can pop it up for a little bit of a spoiler effect. There's also a thing that says test, and it's the first time that you see this aero brake thing that McLaren has started doing on their street cars, where the spoiler actually comes up and provides this big air brake to help slow the car down. You see it again first on the MP412C, but you do see it here, and it's not really talked about a whole lot. But this is, again, that McLaren influence on the Mercedes product. Also, another thing that you started seeing in this time period was, and again, I saw this first on the S2000, where we're hiding the radio away from all the other controls in much more track-focused automobiles. So as the car sits, you really don't see the radio. You have to press this little button and flip up this panel. And now I can access the actual stereo, and it's funny looking at it because the car doesn't really feel all that dated. It doesn't feel like it's a 15, 16-year-old car. But as soon as I flip up and I look at the stereo, I'm like, oh yeah, this dates to a different time period. And it really does date the car a little bit. It's very different than what you expect to see. But Mercedes didn't really want you to see it most of the time anyway. This was a track-focused car. Even though it's still a Mercedes, even though it's still very comfortable to drive, when you're on the track, you're not really wanting to look at the stereo. You don't want to listen to the stereo. You are focused on the car and what the car is doing. And it's, again, a little bit more of the McLaren influence on Mercedes-Benz. One thing that doesn't carry over from the SL is this car has no glove box in it. You have a little bit of storage in here. You've got some storage right here. You've got a little more right here. It actually includes a vintage cell phone in here. We don't have it in this car. The owner has it at his house. There's storage behind the seats as well. It's not a lot. It's not super accessible. The trunk has a lot more storage, but in here it's a little more limited. The door handles and the switch gear for the windows and the seat controls are lifted from the SL, but they're in a very unusual position. You'll find them actually on the floor in between the seat and the door sill. But when you find them, they have a nice feel to them. They have a nice weight. But if you look a little closely, you're like, oh yeah, this is pretty standard Mercedes switch gear for the time, just in a strange position. Thank you for spending time with us today at Petrol Lounge. This has been the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren. If you have any questions or comments about the car, please leave them below. Also hit like and subscribe because we've got a lot of great content coming your way. We have a lot of wonderful machinery here at Petrol Lounge. And until next time, thank you for spending time with us.